The story of David begins long before anyone speaks his name, long before kingdoms tremble at the mention of him, long before his psalms become the soul of a nation. It begins in a small, unimportant hill town, Bethlehem, where stone houses cluster together like sheep and where fields open wide toward the horizon. It begins in a place where greatness does not normally grow, a place where history rarely pauses to take notice. Yet heaven's gaze rests intentionally upon it. Long before David ever holds a sling or feels the weight of a crown, he is simply a child in the house of Jesse, one son among many and the least likely to rise. His brothers stand tall, strong, trained for war and worthy of attention. But David grows up in shadows, not spotlights. While others learn the ways of men, he learns the ways of God. While others sharpen swords, he sharpens songs. While others measure strength in muscle, he measures it in trust. From his earliest years, David is drawn to the solitude of the hills. The sheep entrusted to him roam, and he roams with them, but never carelessly. He studies the patterns of the flock, understands their fears, knows the sound of their bleats, and responds before danger fully arrives. Predators lurk, lions, bears, wolves, and though fear should cripple a boy so young, something steadier takes hold of David's heart. When the flock trembles, he steps forward. When claws flash or teeth glint, he grips his staff tighter. He learns the courage that does not boast, the bravery that does not announce itself, the instinctive protection that mirrors the God who will one day call him his own shepherd. At night, when the sheep settle and the stars appear like scattered jewels across the ink-black sky, David takes up his harp. He plucks notes softly at first, shaping melodies the way a potter shapes clay. Those melodies turn into prayers, those prayers turn into songs, and those songs become the foundation of a life that will one day produce poetry still sung thousands of years later. But on these quiet nights, no one hears but God. No audience applauds, no kingdom listens. Yet heaven leans close, moved by the worship of a boy who has nothing to offer but a sincere heart. While David worships under open skies, the kingdom of Israel moves forward under the increasingly troubled leadership of King Saul. Chosen by God for his humility, Saul has drifted into pride and fear. His disobedience has created cracks in his soul. The people do not see the full extent of his decline, but God sees everything. And so, in a conversation known only to heaven and the prophet Samuel, God speaks with finality. The kingdom will be removed from Saul and given to another, a man after God's own heart. Samuel, carrying the weight of God's words and the sorrow of watching Saul unravel, journeys to Bethlehem under divine instruction. There, in the humble home of Jesse, Samuel prepares to anoint the next king. Jesse proudly gathers his 7 oldest sons. They stand before the prophet like warriors ready to take their places in history. The air is thick with expectation, but as Samuel examines each one, God rejects them all. Confusion fills the room. Samuel turns to Jesse and asks the question that will change the direction of Israel's story. "Are these all your sons?" Jesse hesitates, embarrassed perhaps, or disbelieving. He finally mentions the youngest, the one forgotten in the fields tending sheep. Samuel demands that he be brought immediately, and so David is summoned. He arrives breathless, dusty, smelling of pasture and sunlight, his hair tangled by wind, his eyes bright with curiosity. He does not look like royalty, yet the moment Samuel sees him, God speaks with unmistakable clarity. This is the one. Samuel lifts the horn of oil and pours it over David's head. The oil runs down his hair, drips onto his clothes, and with it, the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him in power. His brothers stare, stunned into silence. David feels something indescribable awakening inside him, a fire lit by God himself, a destiny placed upon him that he cannot yet comprehend. But the moment passes quietly, the ceremony ends. David returns to the hills, anointed as future king, but still a shepherd, called, but not yet crowned, promised, but not yet positioned. This is how God works, not through shortcuts or instant elevation, but through seasons of shaping. Not long after, Saul's tormented spirit intensifies. Darkness clouds his mind. His servants recommend finding a musician to soothe him. Someone speaks of a young shepherd who plays with extraordinary skill, and with a presence that feels holy. Saul summons David, never realizing that the boy who enters his palace is the very one destined to replace him. David stands before the troubled king. When he plays, the atmosphere changes. Saul feels relief. Peace briefly returns. The boy's hands become instruments of healing. His worship becomes a weapon against unseen forces. David does not know that God is slowly bringing him closer to the throne, not through ambition, but through service. Time passes, and Israel faces its greatest challenge yet. The Philistines gather for war, bringing with them a champion whose presence alone freezes men in fear. Goliath of Gath, nearly 10 feet tall, armor heavy as stone, voice like thunder. He steps into the valley each morning and taunts Israel with words dripping in arrogance and blasphemy. 40 days pass. Not one Israelite accepts the challenge. David arrives at the battlefield with bread for his brothers. He expects to deliver supplies, not confront giants. But when he hears Goliath's words, something ignites inside him, a burning indignation that someone would dare mock the living God. Fear paralyzes the men around him, but David sees the situation differently. Goliath may be tall, but God is taller. Goliath may be strong, but God is stronger. And no one, no giant, has the right to defy the Almighty. David volunteers to fight. Saul laughs at the impossibility, but David recalls his days with the sheep, recalls the lion's roar, the bear's claws, the moments when God delivered him from death. If God saved him then, he can save him now. Saul reluctantly agrees. David refuses the armor offered to him. It does not fit the way God designed him. Instead, he chooses a sling, 5 smooth stones, and faith. He walks into the valley. Goliath curses him. David responds not with intimidation, but with unwavering assurance that victory belongs to God alone. The stone flies, the giant falls, history shifts, Israel shouts in triumph, and David becomes a hero overnight. But as always, success invites scrutiny. Jealousy brews in Saul's heart like poison. He hears the women of Israel celebrating David's victories more than his own. Saul's eyes darken with envy. He views David not as a blessing, but as a threat. Despite this, David continues to serve, continues to fight Saul's battles, continues to honor the king who increasingly despises him. And during this time, God brings Jonathan into David's life. Saul's son, a man with a heart pure and noble. Their friendship becomes legendary, a bond formed not through circumstance, but through divine design. David's life becomes more complicated when Saul offers his daughter Michal to him in marriage. Michal loves David sincerely, but Saul's motives are corrupt. He demands a deadly bride price, 100 foreskins of the Philistines, hoping David will perish trying to obtain it. But David achieves it and beyond. He marries Michal, and their early love is genuine and tender. Yet Saul's wrath disrupts their marriage. When Saul sends soldiers to kill David, Michal protects him with courage and deception, helping him escape under the cover of night. David flees. Saul later tears Michal from him, giving her to another man. Their separation becomes a lasting wound, one that later affects David's emotional life and spiritual clarity. As David flees into the wilderness, his life becomes a journey of survival and dependence on God. Caves become his refuge. Forests become safe havens. A gathering of misfits, outcasts, and troubled men join him. Men who see in David not just a warrior, but a leader worth following. They become his mighty men, loyal to the death. In this wandering season, David encounters Abigail. Her husband Nabal insults David at a moment when he desperately needs kindness. Anger swells in David's heart, urging him toward violence. But Abigail intervenes with wisdom and humility that stop him in his tracks. She offers provisions. She speaks truth. She reminds him of God's promises. Her courage disarms his fury. Later, after Nabal's death, David marries her, recognizing the wisdom she brings into his life. David continues living as a fugitive, hunted relentlessly by Saul. Twice he has the opportunity to end Saul's life. Twice he chooses mercy instead. His heart refuses to seize God's promise through bloodshed. He trusts God's timing, even when God's timing seems unbearably slow. Eventually, Saul falls on Mount Gilboa, his life ending in tragedy. Jonathan dies with him. David receives the news and collapses in grief. He writes a lament for the ages, mourning both the king who rejected him and the friend who loved him. David becomes king of Judah, but the kingdom remains divided for years. Finally, all Israel unites and anoints him king. He captures Jerusalem and establishes it as the nation's capital. And from his throne, David looks toward the presence of God. His greatest desire is not political expansion, it is spiritual restoration. He seeks to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. The first attempt ends in tragedy when Uzzah is struck dead after touching the Ark. David is shaken to his core. He pauses, studies, learns reverence. Months later, he tries again with humility and joy. The procession becomes a moment of exuberant worship. David dances before the Lord with abandon, overwhelmed by God's nearness. Michal watches, her heart hardened by bitterness and pride. Their relationship fractures further under the weight of misunderstanding and broken expectations. In this season of spiritual renewal, God sends Nathan with a covenant unlike anything given before. David desires to build God a house, but God instead promises to build David a dynasty. From his line will come an eternal king, whose throne will never end. David is undone by this. He prays with awe, humbled that God would take notice of him. David's reign flourishes. He conquers surrounding nations, brings justice, establishes worship, and strengthens Israel. He shows kindness to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's disabled son, honoring him with a permanent seat at his table. But even the strongest fall when they least expect it. In a season of prosperity, David remains in Jerusalem while his soldiers go to battle. From his rooftop, he sees Bathsheba bathing. Desire clouded by idleness leads him into the sin that will haunt him for the rest of his days. Bathsheba becomes pregnant. Panic drives David deeper into deception. He attempts to manipulate Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, into returning home to cloak his sin. When Uriah refuses, David arranges his death. God sends Nathan. The story he tells cuts through David's soul. David breaks, confesses, and repents with a depth few men ever reach. He writes Psalm 51, crying out for a clean heart. God forgives him, but the repercussions ripple through his household. Pain and chaos erupt among his children. The child born to Bathsheba dies, and David must face the consequences of his choices. His son Amnon violates Tamar, his half-sister. David grieves but fails to bring justice. Absalom, Tamar's brother, takes justice into his own hands and kills Amnon. He flees, returns, but grows increasingly resentful. Eventually, he orchestrates a rebellion, seizing the hearts of Israel and driving David from his own palace. David flees Jerusalem, weeping, barefoot, humiliated. He walks the same path one day Jesus will walk, through the Kidron Valley, bearing the weight of sorrow. The rebellion ends with Absalom's death. David's cry echoes across valleys, "My son, my son." Still more rebellion follows under Sheba. David suppresses it, but the kingdom feels the cracks of internal conflict. In David's later years, he commits another grave mistake. He orders a census to measure his military strength. Pride once again opens the door to judgment. A plague sweeps across Israel. David cries to God, pleading for mercy, offering himself as the sacrifice. God stops the plague at the threshing floor of Araunah. David purchases the land and builds an altar. That place becomes holy ground, the future site of the temple. As David's life draws to its final chapters, he prepares everything for Solomon. He gathers gold, silver, precious stones, timber, iron. He organizes priests, musicians, and Levites. He ensures the temple will rise even if he is not permitted to build it. Yet in his old age, another son, Adonijah, tries to seize the throne. David, frail but resolute, declares Solomon the rightful king. Solomon is anointed. The people rejoice. The kingdom is secured. David, now near death, summons Solomon and speaks with the weight of a lifetime. He urges him to be strong, to walk in God's ways, to uphold justice, to lead with integrity, and to honor the God who has carried them both. David's final instructions are not strategies of warfare, but foundations of worship. After a life filled with triumphs and tragedies, courage and weakness, breakthroughs and failures, David rests. He dies full of days, full of stories, full of repentance, and full of the presence of the God he loved since the days he watched over sheep beneath starlit skies. His story becomes a testament to grace, a reminder that God lifts the humble, restores the broken, and fulfills his promises through imperfect people. And from David's line centuries later, in the town where shepherds once watched sheep, the greatest shepherd of all would be born, Jesus Christ, the Son of David. What aspect of David's life appeals to you most? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and look out for more inspiring Bible stories.